The sun beat down on the flight deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford as Petty Officer Lucas Grant made his way below deck, ducking through bulkheads and passing through a maze of gray steel corridors. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel and disinfectant, a strangely comforting combination after 6 months at sea. Lucas had just finished a 12-hour shift in aviation maintenance, but his mind was on something else entirely: food. More specifically, a late-night snack. The kind of small comfort that helped make shipboard life feel just a little more human. He wasn't alone. Every few paces, someone else in navy blue coveralls or a green flight deck jersey hurried by, heading toward the same place, the carrier's onboard store, affectionately nicknamed the supermarket. It wasn't just a small shipboard PX, it was an engineered marvel. Rows of essentials tucked into a floating steel city, running like clockwork beneath one of the most powerful weapons platforms in the world. The Ford-class supercarrier carried more than 4,000 sailors and aircrew, and each of them relied on the supermarket for the tiny personal luxuries that made life bearable during deployments: snacks, hygiene items, socks, even energy drinks. For someone like Lucas, it wasn't just about grabbing beef jerky or toothpaste. It was a ritual, a moment of control in an otherwise rigid and chaotic environment. The carrier had its mess halls, sure, but there was something grounding about choosing your own treat, even if it came from shelves packed with standardized Navy inventory. As he entered the cool, fluorescent-lit compartment, he spotted Chief Petty Officer Marisol Vega standing behind the small counter, scanning barcodes and keeping one eye on the line. Vega had been aboard 3 carriers before this one, and she ran the ship's supply bay with surgical precision. She noticed Lucas immediately. "You look like hell, Grant," she said, barely breaking her scanning rhythm. "Let me guess, JBD malfunction again?" Lucas gave a tired nod. "Third time this week. The new catapult system's got quirks." Vega handed a bag of trail mix to the sailor in front of him and gestured for Lucas to step forward. "Well, this supermarket's still open for business. What are you after?" He looked over the shelves behind her, each one stacked and labeled, a stark contrast to the roaring unpredictability of the flight deck. "Got any of those protein bars left?" "Second shelf. We got a shipment in during last week's RAS." She paused, then added, "Enjoy them while they last." Lucas gave her a curious look. "Why's that sound ominous?" Vega's expression tightened just slightly. "Because the next replenishment's delayed. Weather's bad near the Azores. Might not see another supply drop for a while." That simple statement hit harder than he expected. Food shortages on a carrier weren't catastrophic yet, but they introduced a new level of tension. Meal planning became tighter. Personal luxuries got rationed. The crew, already stretched thin from long hours and tight quarters, would feel the strain. Lucas grabbed 3 bars and tapped his ID to the scanner. As he walked back toward his berth, his mind raced. Supplies were always a point of friction on deployment, but delays were rare. The Ford was supposed to be at the cutting edge of naval logistics: automated systems, predictive inventory tracking, optimized storage layouts, and yet here they were, facing shortages like an aging destroyer 2 generations past its prime. The tension simmered through the crew over the next few days. Rumors spread quickly. Some said the delay was worse than the command was letting on. Others whispered that new operational orders were coming down from Norfolk, stretching the carrier group even thinner across the Atlantic. Lucas didn't care for speculation, but he could read the signs: fewer snack deliveries, less variety in the galley, empty shelves in the store, little things that on land would seem trivial. At sea, they meant morale was about to take a hit. He found himself back in the supermarket late one night, again face to face with Chief Vega. This time, she didn't have a smile ready. "We've got 2 days of perishable inventory left. Dry goods will hold, but if we don't get a resupply by the weekend, people are going to notice." Lucas leaned against the counter, exhausted but alert. "Anything we can do?" Vega gave a weary nod. Logistics is pulling some strings. We might meet a supply ship ahead of schedule, but it's not guaranteed. In the meantime, I need help keeping morale from cracking. You know the younger sailors. They'll listen to you." He didn't reply right away. It wasn't part of his job, technically. But then again, very little of what really mattered at sea ever was. He nodded. "I'll talk to the squadron. Get them to back off the vending machines, share snacks, that kind of thing." It wasn't a grand gesture, but on an aircraft carrier with steel walls, no personal space, and the unrelenting thunder of jet engines above. It was these tiny moments that mattered most. The supermarket was never just a store. It was a pressure valve, a reminder of home. And now it had become the front line of a quieter, more insidious battle, one of patience, endurance, and trust. Somewhere above, another jet screamed off the deck, and the ship shuddered with its launch. Down here, in the quiet hum of refrigerated shelves, the stakes felt just as high. Lucas found himself volunteering more time in the supply area than he ever thought he would. At first, it was to help Vega manage the growing irritation among the crew, answering questions, calming frustrations, but over time it became something else. The supermarket had become a subtle battleground of morale, and Lucas was beginning to understand just how important its operation was to the ship's overall rhythm. Vega trusted him with more responsibilities, showing him how inventory was managed and how supply requests were communicated through naval logistics networks that spanned oceans. Yet no matter how efficiently they planned, nothing changed the fact that the shelves were thinning out. 1 week after the initial warning, the crew could feel the pressure. Complaints turned into arguments. Junior sailors began hoarding small items, candy bars, deodorant, even socks. It wasn't panic, but it was close. On a ship where everything was counted, measured, and tracked, any deviation sent ripples. Then came the notice. The resupply ship had been diverted. A NATO operation required immediate support, and the supply route had been cut short. There was no clear estimate for the next delivery. Vega took the news in silence, then turned to Lucas. "This is where things get serious. I need you to coordinate with the squadron chiefs. We're going into ration control. Quietly." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "You think we can keep that quiet?" She shrugged. "We can try. Better than letting it explode all at once." It wasn't long before leadership throughout the ship started meeting behind closed doors. Lucas sat in on one such meeting, flanked by Vega and a few senior enlisted leaders from other departments. The executive officer, a sharp, cool-tempered commander named Wells, outlined the situation plainly. Essentials would be fine for now, but non-essentials were to be distributed strictly through a priority list. A new shipment was being routed, but until it arrived, the ship would have to make do. Lucas understood the tactical logic. But below decks, that logic had to be sold emotionally. He spent the next few days walking the compartments, talking to groups of sailors during downtime, explaining the plan not as a punishment, but as a shared mission. It wasn't just about snacks or toiletries. It was about reminding everyone that endurance was as much a weapon as firepower. Some sailors took it well, others didn't. Petty Officer Timmons, a wiry avionics tech known for his dry humor, snapped during a break in the hangar bay. "So what? We're supposed to just smile and chew on socks for the next 2 weeks?" Lucas tried to lighten the mood. "Only if they're mint-flavored?" But Timmons wasn't laughing. "We can fix a jet in mid-air, but we can't get peanut butter on a boat with a nuclear reactor?" Lucas held his gaze. "We're not losing food. We're delaying extras, and we've still got enough to keep us going. But if we crack over protein bars, what's that say about us when the real storms hit?" The words seemed to land, even if just a little. Lucas walked away without knowing whether he'd made a difference, but he kept saying it to different groups, different sailors, over and over. That night, Vega handed him a clipboard with updated stock numbers. "We're good on essentials for another week," she said, sounding more hopeful than before. and the Admiral's pushing the fleet to prioritize our delivery. Lucas flipped through the numbers, nodding. I've seen fewer people coming through the store, less friction. It's working, she said, then paused. But don't let up. One spark, and the whole thing could still burn. The next morning, Lucas found himself on the mess deck with a small group of junior sailors, watching a recorded movie on the overhead screen. It was an old comedy, grainy, pixelated, but the laughter felt real. It wasn't a loud celebration, but it was something. A sign that life, however difficult, was still moving. He sat at the edge of the group, sipping a lukewarm coffee. Timmons appeared beside him, tossing him a pack of gum. "Found it in my locker," he muttered. "Figure we share the wealth." Lucas smiled. It wasn't a declaration of peace, but it was enough. The carrier pressed on, cutting through the Atlantic like a floating city, its heartbeat driven not just by machines or orders, but by the subtle pulse of human resilience. And as the stars rose above the sea that night, Lucas knew they weren't just waiting for cargo. They were holding a line that mattered more than most people back home would ever understand. The rumble of helicopter rotors echoed above the deck as the sun breached the horizon, casting golden streaks across the carrier's hull. Lucas stood near the hangar bay's edge, watching the first wave of vertical replenishment operations begin. The long-awaited supply drop had finally arrived. Two MH-60S Seahawks hovered like mechanical hawks over the flight deck, their underslung cargo nets gently swinging with hundreds of pounds of containers, food, hygiene kits, essentials, and a few luxury items sailors had nearly forgotten existed. The crew moved with practiced urgency, guiding the incoming supplies to safety. Inside the carrier's supermarket, Vega was already directing her team. Pallets were being offloaded and wheeled through narrow passageways and elevators to the deep storage rooms. Her usually composed face wore the faintest trace of relief, though she didn't slow down. Lucas joined her at the entrance just as a crew member handed her a fresh manifest. She scanned it quickly, then looked at Lucas. "We've got enough to reset inventory for the next 30 days, she said, her voice steady. "Maybe even a few surprises." Lucas smirked. "Surprises like the ice cream we promised and never delivered?" "Don't push your luck." Still, the atmosphere below decks had already shifted. Word had spread quickly, faster than official briefings could be issued. Sailors were smiling again. Tensions had softened, and even Timmons, the cynic, had been seen helping haul crates without complaint. Lucas knew better than to think this one delivery solved everything. But it helped. It reminded the crew that even in the darkest moments, something good could still arrive over the horizon. Later that afternoon, the captain himself, Rear Admiral Tillman, arrived to inspect the operation. A tall, weathered officer with a reputation for command calm under pressure, he moved through the storage spaces with quiet attention. When he reached the main distribution room, the heart of the ship's supermarket, he paused. "I've seen chaos unfold over less," he said, addressing Vega and Lucas. "But this department held the line." Vega nodded respectfully. "The crew adapted. We just helped guide the effort." Tillman turned to Lucas. "You were a liaison between logistics and the deck plates. That matters more than most people understand." Lucas accepted the compliment with a simple, "Just did my part, sir." "Doing your part kept things from cracking," Tillman said. Then, without another word, he moved on to the next compartment. The carrier resumed its routine with a strange sense of gratitude. Training missions, maintenance cycles, patrol operations, all continued, but the burden of scarcity no longer clouded daily interactions. In the mess hall, coffee brewed steadily. In berthing spaces, sailors unwrapped long-missed snacks with visible joy. The smallest things, flavored toothpaste, fresh socks, letters from home, had become victories. Lucas sat with Vega in the quiet of the supply office later that night. The room, now cleared of the clutter and improvisations they'd used to get by, felt unusually calm. I didn't think I'd end up learning this much about managing food under stress, he said, his tone light. Vega chuckled. You learned something more important than inventory. You saw how people work under pressure. You helped them hold together. I just kept talking to them. Exactly. Silence stretched for a few moments. The ship's hum vibrated gently through the walls, a reminder that even when everything seems still, this metal city never truly sleeps. Lucas leaned back. Think they'll remember all this when we hit port? Some will, some won't, but they'll all carry a piece of it. That's how these things work. Just then, an intercom announcement cut through the stillness. Attention all hands, Liberty call will commence in 48 hours once docked. Prepare rotation schedules accordingly. The announcement hit like a spark. Shore leave, the promise of firm ground, fresh meals, and a break from the endless ocean. A reward not just for surviving logistics, but for enduring the psychological marathon of life at sea. Lucas and Vega exchanged a glance. Think we'll get a real burger? He asked. Only if you fight through 20 people ahead of you. Worth it. Outside, the hangar echoed with laughter as off-duty sailors set up a quick game of basketball using a makeshift hoop. Music drifted faintly from someone's speaker. And above it all, the sky stretched out, vast, blue, and limitless. Below that sky, deep inside the carrier's steel skeleton, life persisted, connected by more than just duty. It was tied together by shared hardship, quiet leadership, and the unseen bonds formed in the narrow corridors of the biggest floating supermarket at sea. And for Lucas, it wasn't just about supplies anymore, it was about people, and the invisible lines of trust that kept this entire world afloat.